Welcome to the Hero Maker podcast. I'm Andrea Schreeman, writer, director, EP, living in LA.
And I'm Jennifer Morrison, and I currently serve as the Commissioner of Public Safety for the state of Vermont.
We are here to seek out and tell the full story of our friends who were murdered in college, Rachel Raver and Warren Fulton III.
We really need to make sure that their deaths were not in vain and that every possible lesson and improvement for the system can be squeezed from the retelling of the circumstances that ultimately led to the identification of their killer.
Welcome to the Hero Maker podcast. I'm Andrea Schreeman, writer, director, EP, living in LA. Who are you?
I'm Jennifer Morrison, and I am a career police officer and police leader, and a good friend of yours from way back in the day.
Way back in the day. And that's part of the reason why we're here. I mean, maybe all the reason why we're here. Where did we meet?
Oh boy, we met at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. back in the late 80s when I attended GW on a soccer scholarship and you attended on a gymnastics scholarship. And, you know, the soccer players and the gymnasts sort of ran in the same circles along with the male wrestlers and the male baseball players. For some reason, that was sort of the way the teams meshed together. And so, yeah, known you since the late 80s at GW.
Yeah, the late 80s. Yeah, it was I really actually loved going to school in DC. I always talked about it as my starter city. So I lived in DC, I've lived in Manhattan, and I lived in and Brooklyn, and I lived in LA now for over 25 years. But DC was so interesting because there was nobody there at night. So a bunch of people would come in to go to work during the day. And then I felt like we kind of owned it at night, you know, like it would get.
Yeah, we thought we did.
Yeah, it got real quiet, you know, which kind of is almost a perfect segue to the really unfortunate incident that we shared and experienced before our friends were abducted. I really felt very powerful in that city at night. It was just us and the rats. Do you remember the rats of unusual size?
Oh, for sure. I absolutely remember the rats. And I agree with what you said about feeling fearless. And we would walk, you know, from campus to off-campus bars all the way into Georgetown. We'd walk to restaurants, stores.
And I would run. I did runs at night at Lincoln Memorial and back, like boom, you know, get a run in.
Yes, absolutely. After dark, it was not even a thing to go down 23rd Street, hit the mall, do the steps of the Lincoln a few times, go up around the monument, or if you're really feeling good, a little further, and then back up to campus. And I know that I did those normally with someone else like Spleeny or someone else, but certainly there was no hesitation to do it alone. And maybe it's just because when you're young, you're invincible and naive, and certainly coming from a small town, I was relatively naive.
We both came from, I think your small town was maybe a little smaller than mine.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, 100,000 people. Very intimate. What was your small town that you came from?
Well, I grew up in Hanover, New Hampshire, where Dartmouth College is. So I was a little bit familiar with campus life, but not at all to the degree of a major city with multiple large universities in it. So Hanover is a very small town, as you know. So I came to Washington, D.C. as my first big city experience, and I never thought that it would be my last big city experience. I thought that I was destined to return to Washington and play out my career and adult life there, but that's not where my career path took me. So it became my one and only real city experience for about 4.5 years. And after I left GW, I had determined that I was going to become a police officer for a few years to gain some, quote, street smarts. I can go into that later if you want to hear more about my internship with the United States Secret Service and how
I just like to say you came out of the womb with like 6,000% more street smarts than I have today.
Well, thanks. But actually, like when I was doing my internship as a senior at the Washington field office of the United States Secret Service, I had many mentors who gave great advice, who exposed me to things, who showed me what a career as a Secret Service agent might look like. And to a person, they were truthful and said, "You're a real book smart person, but you don't have any street smarts. You should go be a police officer for a few years because you'll never get a do-over. Once you're in the federal system, like that's it." And I thought that actually made a lot of sense to me. And I thought the prospect of being a police officer and out on the street in uniform and chasing down bad guys, I thought that sounded terrific. Next best thing to playing soccer for a living, right? Ultimately, I wound up being hired by the Burlington, Vermont Police Department in December of 1990. And I spent obviously the first year going through the various different trainings and field trainings and being on probation and walking foot patrols and just learning the job. And after that, I spent time in the patrol division. I spent time doing administrative tasks when I was pregnant. Eventually, they have to take you off the road. So I spent time in the detective bureau. I spent time as the director of the countywide sex crimes and child abuse unit. I spent time as a sergeant, as a lieutenant, as a deputy chief. And then I retired from the Burlington Police Department in 2013 to go become the police chief in the neighboring town, Colchester, Vermont, which is a beautiful community on the shores of Lake Champlain. So I spent just over 5 years as the police chief in Colchester. And then I retired, thinking I would actually try retirement out. I was retired about 6 months when our world got turned completely upside down. My husband was diagnosed with two rare and incurable diseases, lymphoma and leukemia. And we got quickly sucked deeply into the medical vortex and spent a lot of time in Boston at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And in December of 2019, the mayor of the city of Burlington, who I had retired from the Burlington Police, called and said he was looking for an interim police chief. Would I consider coming back? And he called literally 30 minutes after we had left Dana-Farber, finding out that my husband was in remission, and that as long as he stayed in remission, 6 months from then, he would be eligible for a stem cell transplant, which was potentially curative for these previously thought to be incurable diseases. So we were feeling pretty good. And it was quite a coincidence that the mayor was asking for 6 months of our time, and we happened to have it all of a sudden. So I returned to the Burlington.
And that's a great way to actually spend, you had something to do instead of sitting there wondering, if your husband would, have an extended future. I mean, wow,
yeah.
that's incredible.
Yeah, it was incredible timing. And, I loved Burlington PD. That was where I had spent my entire young adulthood. That's where I learned how to be a police officer. It's where I learned how to work with the community and catch bad guys and bad gals too. So I was honored to go back and serve as the interim police chief there while they did a nationwide search for their permanent police chief. And then a few months into my tenure there, along came COVID. and the nationwide search process shut down completely, as you can imagine. It was an incredible time to be a police leader. It was the greatest challenge of my career, was leading an organization that needed a permanent leader and didn't have one, trying to get us through an unprecedented pandemic and gauge how we interact with the community or don't. In the early days of COVID, we really didn't have that much information about keeping our first responders safe. And we were building the plane as we were flying it during COVID. And then came this second massive disruption following the murder of George Floyd, of tremendous unrest and communities reevaluating the role of police in the society and the level of accountability and transparency that communities wanted to see from their police agencies. So that was how I spent my time as the interim police chief. And I had to step away from that role in mid-June of 2020 because Wayne had his stem cell transplant and we had to move to Boston for his first 100 days. So it was like a 2 or 3 week warm up to the transplant that we had to be in Boston, and then the first 100 days. I was given the opportunity to come back after Wayne's first 100 days and resume my role as interim police chief, which I declined for a variety of reasons. And so about 2 weeks after I told the mayor that I would not be coming back as interim chief, I was hired by the then commissioner of public safety, to do some work that he created a position because there was an intense need for work around a statewide use of force policy and brand new use of force legislation. So I was doing a lot of legislative work and policy writing work. And then to make a long story short, I went from the policy position to the role of Deputy Commissioner of Public Safety. I was in the role of Deputy Commissioner for about 8 months when my boss left for another opportunity, and I became the Interim Commissioner of Public Safety in July of this year. A few months later, Governor Scott asked me officially to take on the role of Vermont's Commissioner of Public Safety, and I happily said yes.
That is quite a journey from a former retiree. They pulled you back in. Can you give us an update on Wayne? How's he doing, and were his treatments successful?
So right now he is stable. He did have a stem cell transplant back in June of 2020. It was obviously thanks to the goodness of our donor who donated stem cells to a perfect stranger. He had some very significant complications about 10 months after the transplant that have had a large impact on his breathing and on one of his eyes. But generally speaking, he is stable. He's not getting worse, and he is cancer-free. We're just dealing with the side effects of the graft versus host disease. We are very grateful for the progress he has made, and while his mobility and stamina have been significantly impacted, he still has a really very good quality of life and is able to do a lot of stuff, including being a new grandfather.
Yeah, congratulations to both of you. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
I'm a little embarrassed. You're out there fighting the good fight, and I do make stories for a living. So, and I know that that has its place and is important, but of course I admire the way you show up in the world. It's really admirable.
Well, you say that, and I appreciate that, but I think everybody has to gravitate towards their calling in order for us to all make the world a better place. And storytelling and making people laugh or making people be pensive and reflective are completely important pieces of building community. So, we joke about the cape and the clown nose, but both are equally important to have a balanced and healthy community. But anyway, I digress a little bit, and tell me more about your career since we last were together at GW all those years ago.
Oh my goodness. I had like a charmed beginning to my career. I went and I got my master's degree at USC in acting. And one day the professor came in and said, there's a comedy writing team who needs someone to help them change clothes backstage between scenes of a show that they wrote. And my hand shut up really fast. I was like, me. It was at the actor's studio. And I was like, ooh, actor's studio, pedigree. I looked around the room and nobody else was raising their hand. And I was like, oh my gosh, you dummies. Like, how could no one else want to do this? Talk about like seeing your calling. And I went to go work for Renee Taylor and Joe Bologna, this amazing comedy writing team who had this very long career. And then each of them individually Renee is still alive, actors, writers, directors. And that just changing their clothes backstage, they were like, do you want to come work for us? I was like, sure. So I became their assistant. And then within like a year or two, they were shooting a feature film in New York, and they made, I was the assistant to the directors on that film, and they also put me in that film. And so I got my SAG card, which can be very hard to get, but they did it with a snap of a finger. It's called a Taft-Hartley. And I had credits both behind the camera and in front of the camera on that feature film. And that was also Angelina Jolie's first movie. And it was the first film for a company called Alcon Entertainment, which is now made, I think they've made like 40 features. And it was started by Fred Smith of FedEx. And those guys are extremely successful. And it was just a really cool beginning. And I actually, while I shot that movie in New York, because I left LA to go shoot it, I stayed with my college boyfriend, Chaz, who you knew. And then after I stayed with him that summer to shoot the movie, we were like, hey, we want to spend more time together. We want to revive this relationship. So I ended up moving to New York. And then I had several years in New York that were very like entrepreneurial, acting, and also making money lots of different interesting ways like actors sometimes need to do. But I started developing like my acting and writing. Then we both booked HBO showcases. This was in a live space where they helped develop talent. And so Chaz and his comedy group, which was No Time, which is the same group that I was in college, booked a showcase, and I booked a showcase independently as a writer and performer. So we actually saw that as a sign to move back to LA. We came back here, and I never left after that. I've been here for over 25 years. And that I got an agent through that, and I started acting. I did a decade of acting in television and film, mostly television. And it was a very charmed, wonderful decade. But then I got a little itchy because it's hard as an actor to like wait for the phone to ring kind of thing, you know? So I started writing and producing, and that was amazing. I got to work on some network sets, network shows for a couple of years. And then I started producing, and I was producing films, and I started this 1 minute movie studio. This was before YouTube. And I was a showrunner of 5 different series on that, and had a room of writers and ran that room of writers. It was really great. And then we ended up selling those shows on cell phones
What?
to telecom companies on cell phones. And then, like 5 minutes later, YouTube came out, and basically everything we had done was almost obsolete. It was like, oh, now we have to put it up for free on YouTube. But it was really a great time of like building those chops. And then a really big turning point happened when my friend Josh Tikel, who had been working on a documentary feature about fossil fuels and getting the world off of fossil fuels, asked me if I would help him raise the finishing fund for his documentary. And within 1 year of that first conversation, we raised, I'm not going to say the number because people don't like you to say the number in Hollywood, but it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was a good run to help him finish the film. And it became an 11-year journey for him. So he had finished it within a year, and then it played at Sundance in 2008 and won Sundance in 2008. It won the Audience Award for Best Documentary. And that began a long relationship with this amazing, he ended up marrying somebody that I insisted that he marry, essentially, Rebecca Harrell. So Rebecca and Josh Tikel, I now have partnered with them on 3 different films. And I have an associate producer credit on the most recent film that is called The Revolution Generation, which is available right now. It came out in April of this year. And it's all about Gen Z and the millennials and how they are rising up to kind of fill the gaps and help just everyday citizens make a huge difference in how to repair our social fabric. So I highly recommend that. But then I also started directing. So about 5 years ago, I started directing, and I have an award-winning thriller that I didn't write, but is a narrative that just went on the festival circuit, and I got all kinds of amazing awards, including Best Director, and I was nominated for Best Emerging Female Filmmaker. And now I have my very first film that I wrote and directed is about to screen at the Topanga Film Festival. And now I'm making a podcast. So I direct, and my current track is to be directing episodic television and to direct a feature that I wrote in the coming year.
So that's a lot. And I know it seems like a lot of years, but that's a lot of things. It's a very logical progression to keep following your passion and put new skills, right? I mean, it's not that dissimilar from my career in law enforcement, where you come on the job because you have a real passion for it. And after you've been on doing the patrol work a few years, you go into detectives or you go serve in another capacity, whether that's the schools or administration. And then you get promoted to sergeant as opposed to the actor. Now you're the director or whatever. You know, it's not dissimilar from my career path. It's just a different
I really
discipline.
love that you're saying that, because I really do see a parallel. I got my hand in everything. I've literally worked in every department on set. So I often get hired to work art department or to line produce or to be a production manager, or I've worked in the camera department. So yeah, and I feel like when I'm in that leadership role of director or producer, top producer, whatever, I have so much perspective. I'm able to have a good dialogue with people in all these different departments because I've been in their shoes and I know their needs, and it helps me balance all those needs as well.
Well, that's exactly how I felt as a police chief, is that if I had not had the experiences in all the different bureaus of the organization, multiple different assignments within each rank, that you don't have the perspective. But having had those experiences and some pretty unique experiences, including in the world of accreditation and other things that are not all that common in policing, by the time you become the chief, you really do have a pretty broad and deep perspective of the organization. So I think there's a lot more parallels between our career paths than what maybe you would have said at the outset. All of that depth and breadth of experience, that is the path that led us back together. Periodically, we had glimpses into each other's lives, but it was really in, I don't know, within the last 3 to 5 years, perhaps, that we were in more regular communication. And I was wondering if you could refresh my memory and maybe share with our audience a little bit about how it came to pass that you became passionate about telling Rachel and Warren's story.
Absolutely. I don't want to give away too much for the audience about, I mean, they can probably go online and anyone who's hungry for the information will find it. But you played a lot more, I'm going to get emotional here. You played a lot more of a role in this coming into existence than I've shared with you.
Oh.
In 2015, there were some significant details about this case that came to light and occurred. And you posted something on Facebook that was very passionate and detailed about the impact of this case on your life as a police officer and how it, it always tracked, it always showed up in some way. You wrote so powerfully in that posting. And I didn't, of course, I don't always see everybody's post, but I saw that one and it was so powerful and it touched me so deeply. And to me, that was our moment of real reconnection. And then jump ahead 5 years later, I'm at Sundance because I've been going to Sundance, many, many times, not every single year, but mostly. And when I go to Sundance, which is in Park City, Utah, I stay with my college roommate who was also on the soccer team.
Who was also my high school soccer teammate. Small world.
That it's also beautifully intertwined. It almost doesn't feel like an accident. I was sitting with her and I always stay with her one day before the festival, then I go up the hill and then I come down and I stay with her one night after the festival and then I jet off. And at the beginning of the festival in 2020, so it was January, we started talking about college and Rachel came up and the events. And all of a sudden I just had this really kind of powerful impetus, this thing that was just urging me. And my thing that I said to Lisa was, why hasn't anybody ever done anything about this story? Like this is a serial killer. Like and true crime is like the biggest genre on the planet right now. Why hasn't this been done? And then I went to Sundance the next day and I just started testing the waters and be like, yeah, got this idea to do a show about my friends who were murdered in college. And let me tell you something, when you open a conversation with my friends who were murdered in college, everybody leans forward. And I was like, ooh, okay. By June, I had a development deal with a television company to put together a package to see if we could sell this to one of the networks. And we spoke to, I would say 98% of the networks. I got to meet face to face 10 of them, the buyers at, in Unscripted and 10 of these great networks. And then through email or phone conversations, we already found out that the 10 other networks weren't interested for one reason or another, didn't fit what they were doing at the time. But then nobody bought it. But I still wanted to tell the story. And one of the things that occurred to me, in all the people I spoke with about making this, and I pre-interviewed like 22 people, you were one of them. I just felt like your point of view in all of this was so important and so unique in that whether it was directly a result of the events or whether it was like amped up because of your trajectory, becoming a police officer, and then having seen from all these different perspectives, it just felt like you would be such a great, important partner in this. And you said yes, so I got lucky there.
For me, I think one of the most poignant parts of this road, this journey for both of us that led us back together is that not only do I get to be back in touch and rekindle our friendship and obviously get to know you on a whole new level in a deeper way, but I am already learning so much about Rachel and Warren's case that I didn't know. And I know and I completely respect the years of research you've now put into finding out everything you possibly can about their case. And I am really I'm not enjoying everything I'm learning, but I'm really enjoying having a deeper understanding of a case that was so sentinel in my life and shaped many of my attitudes and outlooks on things.
Thank you. And we're here. And I will say this one thing. Making it this way, starting this way, gives us an opportunity to emphasize and celebrate the people who were lost, as opposed to focusing on the killer, which seems to be a little bit of an obsession in the way that most true crime stories are delivered.
Oh, I agree completely. When I think about the purpose, which is to tell Rachel and Warren's story, I hearken back to what I wish the American media would do in mass shootings, which is never say their name, never give them the notoriety that they crave.
Yes. One thing that I'll add to that is that not everybody wants to talk. And I've been working on this for 2 years, and I have earned the trust of some people, many people, and we are very blessed that they're sharing with us and talking to us, because there is some question about how healthy it is to bring things up repeatedly that are traumatic. A lot of people have put this behind them, and they've gone on and they're living functional lives now. And there are some people who actually are still struggling with it dramatically today. So maybe someone has tried, and maybe they haven't been given permission or access.
That's fair. And I hope that what we will strike the balance here on our program is that we will strike that balance around allowing people space to speak publicly, to let their voice and their role in this case be heard, but couple that with the deep empathy necessary to make a safe space for people to share with us, knowing that they never have to have their voice be broadcast, that we can use their words with their permission, that we can relay their piece of the story in a way that is filled with integrity and compassion, but that they don't have to necessarily speak publicly about something that is so haunting and still to this day so emotional.
Yeah, that part makes me really mad that this one human can have put such a dark shadow and a dark thread into the lives of so many people. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about victims and families and survivors. I really do mean the justice professionals, the police officers, the investigators, the jurors. So many people have to get exposed to this person's obscenity to bring it to justice and to move through it. And it's awful.
Oh, yeah. One person's depravity can be that black cloud that follows so many lives, either throughout their life or for a period of their life or intermittently throughout their life. But when you see evil and depravity up close, it is really hard to not come back to that from time to time and to not have that take hold in some way. And like I said, for some people, that's a perpetual state of being. For others, it comes and goes as they're reminded of their friend or their loved one or the case. But there's no turning away from true evil and true depravity. Once you've seen it, smelled it, heard it, you can never forget.
If you or someone you know is connected either personally or as the result of violent crime to Alfredo Prieto, a convicted rapist and killer who lived in and around San Bernardino, California, Arlington, Virginia, and Jamaica, Queens, New York, between the years of 1984 and 1990, we'd like to hear from you. Please email us at info@theheromakerpodcast.com.
What would you say to your crew after a morning meeting as a chief when you're sending people out? I feel like we should have some way of like, okay, we're going to go out there now. What do you say to your team?
Stay safe. Take care of each other.
All right. That's what we'll do.
Stay safe.
And take care of each other.
Thanks to audio producer, mixmaster, and sound designer Andy Bill of Submachine Audio. Thanks also to media producer Michael Doherty. And thanks to me, Hero Maker director and producer Andrea Schreeman. Please subscribe to the show where you listen to podcasts and take a moment to rate us. It really helps the podcast grow. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Hero Maker Pod. Want to collaborate or suggest a guest? Please email us at media@theheromakerpodcast.com. The Hero Maker Podcast is a production of Prudent Pictures. Thanks so much for listening.